The topic of this video is motor development, but more specifically, we're going to talk about gross versus fine motor skills. Okay, so let's first define what we're talking about when we talk about gross motor skills. And one way you might remember what gross means in this context is to think about a paycheck you may have gotten. So if you've ever had a job and you looked at your paycheck, many times the employer will break down your pay by gross and net pay. So one part of the check will say gross pay a certain amount, another part will say net pay a certain amount. Which is the amount you actually get? Well, it's net pay. Okay, so the gross pay is your salary before the taxes are taken out, before the FICA, before all that stuff is taken out, right? So the reason it's called your gross pay is because it's the bigger amount. Okay, so gross means big, and when we're talking about gross motor skills, we're talking about motor skills that involve the large muscle activities. Okay, so remember that motor development refers to movement, and when we're talking about gross motor skills, we're talking about moving the large muscles in our bodies. So think about what the largest muscles in our bodies are. They're the muscles in our legs. They're the muscles in our torso, our middle part of our bodies, and also the muscles in our arms. So I'm going to list a few gross motor skills here, and I'd just like you to, just on your own, just guess. I'll pause after each one and see if you can estimate. Just take your best estimate. You may or may not be familiar with these ages, but just think about, when do I think this would happen? So on average, how old do you think children are when they're first able to roll over? Well, it's about 3 to 4 months. Okay, so the rolling over involves those trunk muscles, those middle muscles in our bodies. How old do you think we are before we're able to sit without support? So to sit up and not topple over, to sit up without, a back, like a back on a chair or something. Most of us were around 6 months old when we were able to do that. How about crawling? How old are most children when they're first able to crawl, do you suppose? That's much more involved than sitting up. That would be 6 to 8 months, okay? And these are averages. So remember, some children, maybe you may have been ahead of the schedule here. Some children can be behind, but these are the averages. Okay. Next one, how old are children when they're able to walk with the support of furniture? And that's actually called cruising. So, kind of walking around and holding on to chair legs or maybe a table. We're about 10 to 11 months, most of us. And the last one, the biggie, how old are most of us when we're able to walk without assistance, to walk on our own, without holding someone's fingers or with a walker or anything like that? 12 to 13 months. Okay, so that's kind of a good rule of thumb. Just kind of remember that most of us are walking somewhere around our first birthdays. And all of these are involving gross motor skills. This next slide is just kind of a graph giving you a range. Remember I said those numbers we were talking about before, those ages were averages. So these green bars kind of give you a range. And these are some other gross motor skills that I didn't talk about all of these. But it gives you an idea. The age in months is up here. Okay, so from 0 months to 15 months. I also kind of like this graph because it gives you an idea of how things progress. Okay, so one of the first things, we talked about this before, one of the first things we're able to do is hold our heads up. And then we kind of progress to where we're able to walk by ourselves. Okay? So those were all gross motor skills. Fine motor skills, as you may have kind of figured out by now, involve fine muscles, finely tuned movement. So gross motor skills refer to big muscles. Fine motor skills refer to being able to control our smaller muscles. And primarily when we talk about fine motor skills, we're talking about the hands and the fingers. Okay? So let's play this game again real quick. How old do you think most kids are on average when they're able to do these things? To hold a rattle briefly. How old are we when we're able to do that? About 2 months. Okay. How old, now this is more complicated, how old are we when we're able to pull a string? So to pull a string, you have to be able to grasp it with your fingers, but also have the control in your hands to be able to hang on to it and pull it. About 7 months. Okay. Here's an even more complex task. Pick up a raisin, or it doesn't have to be a raisin. It could be a Cheerio or whatever, but some little object with your thumb and your forefinger. That's a little bit later, 10 to 11 months. Okay. And then the last one on our list here, how old are we when we're able to scribble with the fat crayon? We're not talking about being able to draw intentionally, but to be able to hang on to that crayon and move it around. How old are we? 12 to 18 months.